So welcome back to day 2 of our Diaspora Convention. As you can tell, we are running slightly behind schedule, but we will try our best to get back on schedule as best as we can. At this point, I'd like to welcome our keynote speaker for this morning, Honorable Shelburne. If you could please come to the podium and provide us our opening remarks.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning. I'm happy to see that you had an extra hour to wake up. I was just telling my friends at the table that when I'm in Africa, I adjust completely. I take off my wristwatch, and I'm on African time. But when I'm here, I'm on American time. So glad to be here. But first of all, let me say that it's been a distinct pleasure to be involved with DICOTA for all of these years, with the exception of the first formative conference. And it's been great to see how things have been progressing and how much better the organization has developed, the level of professionalism, the level of involvement from all over the country is wonderful, as well as the involvement from Dar es Salaam, from the various agencies, government agencies, as well as private agencies there. So I'm very appreciative of that. But first, let me do the formalities. I won't be terribly diplomatic, but I'd like to acknowledge Her Excellency Ambassador Mbega. And at some point, I presume also that Ambassador Masilingi will be joining us. That is a testament to the attractiveness of DICOTA to the Tanzanian government, that there's not one, but 2 ambassadors to support you in your pursuit. So I have a great deal of poetic license because I was not told what to speak about. That puts you all in great jeopardy. So I thought that I would answer the question that many people have asked over the years, and I'll now answer it collectively. And then, why are you involved with DICOTA, and why have you been involved for so long? And that requires a few minutes of setting it up. So let me tie in, I'm a policy wonk. I'm interested in good public policy, and my formal training, both undergraduate and graduate, happens to be in international relations, so I'm passionate about these things. In 1967, the US Supreme Court threw out all bans on interracial marriage in all 50 states. And in 1968, I married an incredibly beautiful, incredibly smart Tanzanian woman who had spent her entire life from day 3 in the Kifugito orphanage in the Usambara Mountains, which fittingly in those days, and I say that with sarcasm, was called the Don Bosco Home for Unwanted Children of Mixed Heritage. A wonderful place to grow up, being beaten into shape by German nuns for the most part, and later by the Maryknoll sisters at Marian College in Morogoro, and later by American nuns at the College of St. Kate's, which brought her here. So at any rate, that answers part of the question why I'm committed to Tanzania. I suspect I may have been married to a Tanzanian longer than most people in this room, 36 years to be precise. And I come from Norway originally, so as a present once, I gave my 2 adult children now a t-shirt that said, it had an outline of Africa, and it said, "Black by birth, proud by choice." And then I got one for myself, and put a marker to it, and it said, "Black by marriage, proud by choice." So I'm probably the only blue-eyed member of the tribe. So, and it turns out, actually, after all these years, I've been going back many, many years, we found out that my wife, ex-wife, did in fact have a family, and it turns out she was Sukuma, which she did not know, and we were privileged to find her father and had a few very good years with him before he passed on. So that's part of the connection. As we move forward, in 1974, the then Swedish ambassador to Tanzania, Knut Granstedt, and his wife Ali, who were very close friends of mine and my wife's, called and said, I've been appointed ambassador to Tanzania. We want you to come and spend 2 weeks at the embassy, 29 Msasani Road in Oyster Bay at the residence. And I told my wife, I'm home. I found another homeland. This is it. So we traveled extensively throughout the territory, and I got involved with charitable events. I figured that the two things that could make a difference in people's lives are health and education. I got heavily involved with a group called Operation Bootstrap Africa, and many, many other groups since then, but that was the first one. And I agreed to have a fundraiser at my house in 1981 for the Tanzanian ambassador, who was Benjamin William Mkapa. He was on his way to my house and called from the airport, says it's been a terrible tragedy. I have to report to Dar es Salaam. I'm very sorry, I'm sending my DCM. I'll call you from Dar es Salaam. It turned out the reason he was being recalled was to take up a position as foreign minister because Prime Minister Sokoine had been killed in a car accident that day. But the ambassador and I became very close friends. I got his kid in at Augsburg College in Minneapolis, where I was on the board. He went on to become foreign minister and subsequently president, and he would make a practice of calling me wherever he was and giving a speech at the United Nations. Why don't you come to New York and join me for a few days? I'm meeting with the UN ambassador, Andrew Young, in Atlanta. Would you join us, please, for the meetings? He said, oh, by the way, my wife is coming to Florida. Could you put up a couple of events for her in Florida? So those are the kinds of ties that we've had over the years. And I have to tell you one very funny footnote on the side. When Anna Mkapa was coming to Florida, my wife and I had just moved there. We had businesses both in Florida and Minnesota. And so we did not have a network of our own. So I contacted a young woman who was chairwoman of the group called 100 Black Women, so that we have an organizational base. And she said, I will talk to the mayor of West Palm Beach, and I will go before the city council meeting tomorrow at 1 o'clock. We'll get some money for the organizational expenses. 15 minutes to 1 the next day, she calls me and she said, my TV station is sending me on assignment. I can't go, you have to make the presentation. So I go before the city council, and they said, we will now have a presentation by the chairwoman of 100 Black Women. And they were more than slightly surprised when I stood up. So I said, Mr. President, I must confess that I'm really not a dues-paying member of the organization, but I'm a very enthusiastic supporter. And he said, just for that, you get $1,000. So then, as we fast forward, I became involved with a lot of things, and I promised the president that I would always live by one rule. I would tell him what he needed to hear, not what he wanted to hear. And I would always tell him that privately and not in public. And I've kept that rule until I was no longer in an official capacity. He appointed me honorary consul in the year 2000. And now with a new president, with a new foreign minister, who happens to be a friend of mine, and with a new principal secretary in the foreign ministry, and with a new ambassador in Washington, and I had just turned 70, I figured it was a good time to retire from that part of my life. So that's why I'm taking the privilege of going over some of these historical events while we're here. So then in 2000, when I was appointed the first honorary consul, and therefore the dean of the honorary consuls for Tanzania and the United States, I decided that we should always work on the trajectory to make sure that going forward, it shouldn't just be old white guys that were honorary consuls, and we should work on making sure that the diaspora, and that's the tie-in, I'll get back to that later, would train its own candidates for honorary consuls. And the first one I introduced was Dr. Dallas Brown, who coincidentally, an African-American professor who coincidentally married a Kifungilo girl also. And he became the second honorary consul. When I sent the government a notice 11 months ago that I was going to be retiring, I recommended people from the diaspora, 2 of whom are in the room today. And I can't name them because they've not been cleared by the State Department yet. But the point is, I've been saying and practicing that it's you folks, members of diaspora, who have the strongest ties to your home country that should be taking up the roles as honorary consuls when it's practical to fill those positions that way. I only have to warn you about one thing. The pay is lousy. It's a labor of love, as you can tell. I'm accredited to the states of Florida and the state of Minnesota, but in an average year, I deal with Tanzanians who have some sort of a need in about 15 to 16 states. And that's partly because the embassy has limited staff and limited resources. And I'm at the place in my life where I can be flexible and move quickly, and I cover my own expenses. So I go to California, I go to New York, and point of fact, I frequently deal with NGOs in Washington, D.C. that need a little help. So that's been a real treat. In 2009, to jump forward, DICOTA was going to have its convention in Minneapolis, and they came to see me. Several of the group's members are in the room, including Dr. Crispin Samakula, and Leonard Tenenda was also there, who had to leave for the funerals in Houston. And so I said, how much money have you raised? Well, how much money are you going to raise? Well, we don't know. Well, you have to start someplace. So I gave them some money to get started, and I said, so who's going to be the MC? Well, we don't know. Well, who's your main speaker? Well, we don't know. Well, we've invited the president. The point is, I'm not saying this to be funny. I'm saying simply to say it was very early in the organizational life of DICOTA. So I was able to get the Secretary of State of Minnesota to open the conference, and a very close friend of mine who is one of the top television broadcasters in Minnesota, African-American, Robin Robinson, to be the MC for the entire 3-day period at no cost. And I got Mark Lindsay, who was assistant to President Clinton and in charge of the entire White House staff, Camp David staff, and Air Force One staff, as well as the airlift wing, to come and talk from an inside the White House perspective. And we got a couple of private citizens to come and talk about their involvement in Tanzania. And I think they all agreed that it was a very successful conference. I was very impressed with what you all put together. So when we talk about leveraging the Tanzanian diaspora, there are so many ways to do that, and there are excellent panels following that will deal directly with that, so I won't spend a lot of time on that, but I'll give a little bit of examples, because you can do it on the charitable level, you can do it on the professional level, you can do it on an economic level, and you can do it on an intellectual level. And it always comes back to governments have different views on the diaspora. From time to time, there are government leaders that will say, it's a brain drain, you guys chose to leave our country and stay overseas. I think that's a flawed view. I think, and I'm not suggesting the Tanzanian government takes that position. I think it's more of a brain game. You have so much to offer when you work in this country and in other countries around the globe. You can bring technology, you bring management skills, you bring capital, you bring cultural assets back to your country. It's incredibly important. It doesn't matter so much where you reside, it matters what you do. And that's the brain game. And I think too that since I'm now retired, I can say some of the things publicly that I have previously said privately behind the scenes. Since you're going through a period now rewriting the Constitution, which I applaud you for, it's been a very timely, very professional, and very involved and inclusive effort as far as I can see. But one of the things that always puzzled me is that in the parliamentary model that Tanzania uses, only members of parliament are eligible to serve in the cabinet. That means that less than 1/10 of 1% of the talent in the country is eligible to serve in the cabinet. And I think that the diaspora, you look around this room here, and you look at the professions, you look at the master's degrees, you look at the PhDs, you look at the MPH, you look at the MDs, the number of degrees in this room today, let alone in the rest of the country, is simply astounding. And the country can benefit from drawing from that larger pool, in my opinion. I'm not telling Tanzania how to do it, but I think it would be a tremendous asset for the country. And again, speaking freely, I've always said, because corruption is a central theme in all discussions in all countries, including the United States. We have a lot of governors and mayors in jail in this country. And we have a former Speaker of the House, the second highest ranking constitutional officer that's headed to jail now. So this is not pointing fingers in other directions, it's a general observation. You cannot expect to deal with corruption unless people are paid living wages back home. And you cannot deal with corruption unless you apply it equally at the leadership level. When the UDERA had the leadership code, that was a wonderful thing because it spelled out what you and your family could and could not do. So while presidents cannot, under the present arrangement, become wealthy while they're in office, members of their family can, and I think that's something that should be talked about. Numbers of presidents in many African countries, many European countries, have had members of their families become incredibly wealthy while the president is in office. That to me is another form of corruption that should be discussed openly. So let me go back a little bit on ways that you can contribute again. And I'm not a good spectator. I like to do things. So I'd like to share with you some of the things that I have done to be involved, and you're all capable of doing exactly the same. And many of you, if not most of you, already done these kinds of things. But for example, I've climbed Kilimanjaro 3 times to raise money for the Celian Hospital and for Books for Africa and for Operation Bootstrap Africa. Twice I've walked from Loliondo to the Celian Hospital outside of Arusha, 211 miles in 8 days, twice to raise money, pledges. And in a separate event, I was able to get fully funded a fistula repair wing at Celian Hospital so that women who have been ostracized by their families and by society because of the odor and leakage problems that affliction carries with it could now rejoin society by having birth canal repairs. We can all do different things at different levels. I've been heavily involved with KCMC, Kilimanjaro Christian Medical Center, and specifically the School of Radiology and Ultrasound there, which now has graduated a very large number of medical officers in ultrasound and in radiology. I've been heavily involved with the Dodoma Christian Medical Center, which is turning out to be a premier facility. I'm very, very proud of those kinds of involvements in the work that they're doing. For many years, I was involved with International Heart Relief, which flew Tanzanian kids to Minneapolis, provided open heart corrective surgery at no charge, and flew them back to Tanzania. I did the same with the Heart to Heart Foundation with Drs. Betty and Dan Gikonyo in Nairobi, who have since built a 5-story modern Western hospital in the suburb of Karen, where they now do their own open heart surgeries. On the diplomacy side, you're all well connected. and you can bring guests from your home state, you connect with your politicians, you connect with the governors, you connect with university presidents, and your congressional delegation. That's incredibly important. So back in 1995, I was privileged to bring out the entire royal family of Norway, the king and queen, the crown prince, the future king, and the princess, on an 8-day safari, a tenting safari, because as they said, we do palaces for a living, that's boring, let's not stay in hotels. So we went camping, and I asked the king if I could offer President Mkapa, who had just taken office a very short period before that, a state visit, an official visit. And he said, if it's helpful, of course. So we sent the kids home. The king and queen's kids and my older kids are exactly the same age, and they're friends. So we sent them home, and the official state visit to Tanzania, the delegation from Norway, consisted of the king, the queen, the king's adjutant who flew in, and my wife and I, and we were American citizens. So that's probably the strangest royal Norwegian delegation ever. And it was the first time that a sitting king had visited Tanzania. And a year and a half ago, Nasibu Sadeva and Ben Kazora and I were privileged to bring over Keith Ellison, the first elected Muslim to the United States Congress, on his first personal tour to Tanzania. So we went to both to Dar es Salaam, to Arusha, and we went to Zanzibar and made a presentation at the University of Zanzibar School of Law and Sharia, where Keith, as the first Muslim, was very, very well received. And we all were. It was a fabulous trip. And in February, I went back with Nasibu Sadeva, and we went with an 80-year-old friend of ours who started Books for Africa, which has now sent 29 million books to Africa, including several million to Tanzania, and 44,000 books this month to Zanzibar. And so we walked across Zanzibar for 2 days in 96-degree heat, 96% humidity, and that was not impressive. What was impressive was the horn section of the marching band that walked ahead of us the entire distance in that heat. And we had hundreds and hundreds of students follow us in stages. We've also brought out, I was privileged to host President Carter and his family of 11, former Senator Durenberger from Minnesota, who hosted a large number of American ambassadors over the years. I worked with all of the Tanzanian ambassadors since 1981, without exception. And I worked with all but 2 of the American ambassadors to Tanzania, without exception other than those 2 over the years. So we established some pretty healthy relationships, and that's what it's all about. If you have relationships, you can make things happen. And on the business side, as you recall, the border with Kenya was closed for a long time, and in the dispute over revenue sharing, the Tanzanians did not like that the Kenyans were bringing their minibuses across at Namanga and keeping all the hard currency in Kenya, and we got just the soft currency and T-shillings. So the border was closed, and a now deceased friend of mine and I, an American missionary who lived in Arusha, bought Tarangire Safari Lodge. It had 500 bed nights, 500 visitors the year before we bought it in 12 months. Within 3 years, and keep in mind the border with Kenya had been closed all this time, we were up to 17,000 bed nights in 1 year. And we also started Serengeti Select Safaris, which took mostly American guests all over on safari. And I happen to own a 126-year-old tour operating company that specializes in Eastern and Southern Africa. So while I've sold the Safari Lodge, we send more people than we ever have to Tanzania on safari. So when it comes back to full circle here on the diaspora and how it should be involved, I'm so pleased to see that the ambassador is here representing the diaspora section of the Foreign Ministry, because that's clearly a recognition of how important you all are to your own country and to the Foreign Ministry. They would not set aside the resources that it takes to maintain that section at the ambassadorial level within the ministry if it was not important. That's a very, very high level of commitment. Now, what always happens, for those of you who are in business or whether you're in academia, you know that there's sometimes a gap between policy and implementation. That will always be the case, doesn't matter which country or what the setting is. So I would encourage all of you to ask for, and I'm sure you'll get it, maximum cooperation, not just from the embassy, but also from the Foreign Ministry, from the diaspora section. Because if you are going to be effective spokespersons for your home country, you have to be fully informed. So I have, for example, asked that all honorary consuls receive the same circulars, non-classified of course, that the rest of the embassy staff gets. Anything that's relevant to Tanzanian policy that should be shared with the American public, the honorary consuls should all receive that so that they're fully informed. And to be brutally frank, I think it is strange that there aren't other honorary consuls at this conference. That should be facilitated so that would be considered, for all intents and purposes, mandatory. That if you want to serve as honorary consul, DICOTA is your first bus stop. You need to be there. And I know that the two candidates in the room that I recommended share that feeling, and they'll follow through on it, I'm sure. And finally, two completely unrelated things that I just would like to share, get them off my chest, because I've held it back all these years when I was official and felt constrained not to say anything about it. I think that Tanzania is now in such a terrific position with the finding of gas, and because my brother was in government relations for Statoil, I also know something about oil that is in the sea, in addition to gas. Tanzania is going to be able to fund its dreams going forward, provided that it's properly managed and following, for example, the Norwegian model. They've hired Statoil and the Norwegian Offshore Wealth Fund to help assist in the planning, instead of following the Nigerian model, which did not work especially well. So if the assets, and I know we have Nigerian friends here, I'm not shooting at you, but I spent some time in Nigeria and I know that to be the case. So the resources will be there to take Tanzania to an entirely different place. But unfortunately, with that much money coming in, there's also opportunity for mismanagement, graft, and other things that must be closely guarded against. And I think that the government should rethink how it places people in leadership roles in parastatals. I know there's a smaller number of parastatals than there used to be, but it should not be sufficient that you're a retiring politician that's been put out to pasture, that you're now all of a sudden qualified to head up a major parastatal. That requires a subset of skills that don't come naturally just because you've been a member of parliament or a cabinet member or an RC or a DC. Point being, with all the assets that are coming on stream, it's going to be very important that Tanzania looks very carefully at the qualifications of the people that are put in leadership roles at all levels of society and at all levels of the economy. And finally, Air Tanzania needs to land and it needs to stay grounded. I've been in the tourism business and travel business forever. I've been a licensed pilot since 1968, and I can tell you that there is no way that bird can be kept airborne. It's simply not going to happen. It's a tremendous waste of resources. If Air Afrique, sponsored by 10 African governments, couldn't stay airborne, And if Scandinavian Airlines, which has been technically bankrupt with 3 or 4 of the wealthiest countries in Northern Europe, can't make it, Air Tanzania doesn't have a prayer. So I recommend that you put that bird to rest. But the good news is that Tanzania has got so much more going for it than so many other African countries. It's got a very stable government. It's got a highly sophisticated and educated leadership group. It's highly regarded within Africa as a peacekeeper in much the same way that Norway is in the rest of the world. And it has not only a rising star, but a solid star with Washington. I've been privileged to have discussions with both the First Lady and President Obama, and I've also been a guest at the Bush Ranch in Crawford, Texas, when President George W. Bush was in office, and I know how highly them and the Clintons, I also had dinner with President Clinton discussing Tanzania. All 3 of those presidents hold Tanzania in extremely high regard, and that's something that most other African countries cannot similarly claim. Should cherish it, should nurture it, and Ibariki Tanzania.
Thank you. So we're going to move a couple of things around. As I mentioned, we're slightly behind schedule, and we also have speakers from Tanzania who, as I mentioned yesterday, were delayed with their travel plans and are here today, who were scheduled to speak yesterday but will be on the agenda for today. And so at some point I'll call them up. I do have a question though for this group. If you went to bed at 10 p.m., raise your hand. 10 p.m., answer the question. If you went to bed at 10 p.m., raise your hand. Okay, keep your hand raised. Just I see you. If you went to bed at 11, raise your hand. Keep your hands up. Don't put your hand up. So, if you went to bed at 11, raise your hand. Okay. If you went to bed at midnight, raise your hand. Keep your hands raised. Don't put your hand down. If you went to bed by 3, keep your hands up. Raise your hand. When you went to bed, okay. Keep your hands up. How many have not yet slept? Clap your hands. At this time, I'd like to bring to the podium representatives from PSPF, Constantina Tina Martin. I'd like to bring up representative for NSSF, Boniface. Is Boniface in the room? Boniface is here. And then I'd also like to bring up a representative from the Higher Education Loan Servicing Board. Please. So as I mentioned, we're trying to squeeze this program together. Yeah, please come on. So if you could just spend maybe 15 minutes, no more than 15 minutes. I'm going to set the timer. And at 15 minutes, the timer will beep. Yes. So you're up. Karibu.
Yeah, I'm pausing a bit because I'm trying to figure out greetings which can fit this audience. In October, back home, we had an election, and one day our pastor came into a pulpit, And we were waiting for the word from our pastor. But instead of saying Bwana asifiwe, akasema kidumu Chama cha Mapinduzi. So even myself, I paused a bit here in order to find out which greetings really fit this audience. Good morning, everybody. Thank you. Yeah, maybe first of all, I would like to congratulate the organizers, the DICOTA organizers here in the US. Maybe we should put your hands together for them. Secondly, also, I would like to appreciate and congratulate the organizers back home in Tanzania, led by Balozi Anisa Mbega. No, but back home, we don't clap like that. Do you watch Parliament? Okay, I'll ask you to start. Parliament clapping, the way we're clapping in the Parliament. So 1, 2, 3. So that is how we clap back home. So where's my presentation? It's coming. I already finished now. I don't know what to speak. Yeah? It's coming. But I think when I'm presenting, I should go down there, is it? Yeah. Because I cannot see. Yeah.
Members of the DICOTA and other participants of the DICOTA conversion, good morning. Yes, my name is Robert Kibona. I'm working with the Higher Education Students Loans Board. And I'm sure this organization, institutions, is very famous to most of you. That first of all, its functions is to make sure that those Tanzanians who want to access the higher education in Tanzania as well as outside country, they are really financed. They are given loans to finance the cost of higher learning studies. Before I proceed, first of all, I would like to appreciate and then to go to the government of Tanzania, specifically through the Ministry of Education, as well as the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperations, really for financing my TPA to participate in this very national meeting. Really, I appreciate, first of all, then we have to clap hands for the Ministry of Education as well as the Ministry of Finance. Then I will be, first of all, then I am purposely here then to deliver a message. To deliver a message to Tanzanians, the member of the DICOTA, and all other Tanzanians who are living in the USA. Then before I deliver the message to you, briefly, I have then to tell you what is a higher education students loans board, what is the functions, and what is the status of loan issuance to the students who are pursuing higher learning institutions in Tanzania as well as outside the country, as well as the status of loan recovery from those who benefited from this loan since 1994 and to date. I am sure most of you are really happy, and then like other presenters who have been presenting, kwa sababu walikuwa na present kwamba come Tanzania, we give you this one and we do this one, but this one is now your turn then to fulfill your obligations in terms of repaying the loans that you enjoyed while undertaking your study in higher institutions, so that the other Tanzanians who really needs them to access higher institutions should get loans from the government. Because these funds of higher institutions is a revolving fund. We issue loans and to make sure that these loans which are being issued are really recovered, so as to finance other Tanzanians, poor Tanzanians who you have left at home. They don't have any means of accessing higher education except through the loans that the government is giving to them. And the Higher Education Students Board was established under the Act of 204 as amended, and its core activities is to issue loans to students as well as to recover these loans so that the same should be related to the other Tanzanians who need the loan. So you have, you as diaspora members who really benefited from these loans, you have a great role to play to make sure that those who Tanzanians living there where you have come from in Tanzania, they access. Kwa sababu, if you don't play your role, kulipa mkopo wako, kwa maana kwamba Watanzania wadogo zako ulioacha kule nyumbani, ambao wametoka shule za kimaskini, familia za kimaskini, watashindwa kupata mikopo ile. Kwa serikali ya sasa hivi ya Dr. Jakaya, sorry. Akidisikia, don't shout please, so that Dr. Pombe Magufuli alipoingia madarakani alisema kwamba mimi nataka kuwasomesha Watanzania ambao wasoma shule za msingi na za sekondari bure, and now he's really implementing. If you hear from Tanzanians, they really enjoy this service. They undertake the primary education free and secondary education free. Lakini pia sema kwamba sitawasahau wale ambao wanasoma vyuo vikuu. Kwa mwaka huu aliongeza budget. Budget iliongezeka kwa asilimia 25. Kabla ya hapo, wanafunzi walikuwa wanapewa mikopo kila mwaka ilikuwa 97. Mwaka huu imeongezeka, waliopewa ni 120,000. Na mikopo wanayopewa mwaka jana walipewa bilioni 502 ukilinganisha na bilioni 300 ambazo walipewa huko mwanzo. So you can now see this serikali hii imekuwa dedicated to pump in the money so that the Tanzanians, they really get loans so that they have to access the higher education universities. Kwa hiyo, I really urge you then, kwa sababu nyie mna watoto, I've been talking to my lady here, anataka kupata mkopo. You come to Tanzania, tutakupa mkopo, but make sure that utakwenda kusoma chuo Tanzania ambacho kinaweza kutoa elimu inayofanana na inayopata hapa nchini. Lakini pia na watoto wenu ambao mnao wadogo zenu, waje nyumbani, watapata mikopo, wataenda kusoma kwa pesa hizi ambazo mtaanza kurejesha hii mikopo. Niende very briefly kwenye statistics. Mikopo so far ambayo imetolewa na bodi ya mikopo ya wanafunzi na wanafunzi elimu ya juu ni trilioni 2.2. Trilioni 2.2, na hii mikopo ilianza kutolewa mwaka 1994. The way back in 1994. By then, the government through the Ministry of Higher Education, Science and Technology were issuing loans to those students before the establishment of the board in 2005. Na so far, mikopo ambayo watu wamesha hitimu, wameshamaliza na wanaodaiwa ni trilioni 1.1. Trilioni 1.1, hizi ndio pesa ambazo ziko kwa Tanzania, walipata mikopo, wanazo huku, watakiwa waanze kuzirejesha. Mpaka leo ninapoongea, pesa ambazo tulitaka turudisha ni bilioni 256. 256, bali tumesharudisha bilioni 93 kwa Tanzania. Kwa sababu mwitikio mkubwa wa Tanzania walioko kule nyumbani wanajua umuhimu wa kurejesha hizo pesa, kwa sababu hao ndio wanaathiri pinch ya wadogo zao ambao watashindwa kupata mikopo ni kwa sababu ya limited budget ya serikali iliyonayo. Na mwaka huu serikali imesema okay, tumepata hela nyingi sana. 2.2 trillion ni hela nyingi sana. Sasa cha kufanya kwamba mwaka huu tutapunguza budget, na tayari tumeshapunguza budget, tuna deficit ya bilioni 104. Kwa hiyo serikali, rais amesema kwamba bodi ya mikopo ya you have to make sure that you recover 1 bilioni 104 ili ziweze kufidia hiyo gap. So where are we really recovering? Watanzania wako kule nyumbani wanalipa. Now the motto ya serikali sasa hivi in the national agenda is to make sure that these loans are being recovered. Na amesema kwamba for those who do not service their loans, haya than so-called majibu. If you don't service the loans, amesema kwamba ni majibu, is like the one who is avoiding to pay tax, because this is the government funds. You have own obligations, because when you really applied for the loans, you said, I am applying the loans, this is the loans, I will pay back. And you say, after graduating from studies, I will enjoy this period of 12 months, thereafter I will start servicing the loans. But very unfortunately, there are few Tanzanians who come into the board that I know the loans is due for the payment, I want to start. Said, but they are just complete the studies, they are disappearing. Most of them, they disappear, and most of them, they are really traveling abroad, like you guys who are here, specifically those who join this group. And also, these loans were guaranteed by the grantors. The grantor, the parents, the guardian. Also, they had an ability to make sure that those loan beneficiaries who they guaranteed, they have to service their loans. They have to report to the board, and they have to be interested in their whereabouts. But very unfortunately, they don't do. This is a big challenge that is facing the board. And very briefly, I would like to see the conditions of repayments of loans. That loans are paid at a rate of 8% of the base salary. Specifically for those who have been employed, as salary loan beneficiaries, they have to service their loans at a rate of 8% of their base salary. But for those who they have not been employed, they are private employed, the minimum balance to repay their loans is 120,000, almost 45,000. There I can see the base scoring. Very briefly, that is the message that I want to give. Please, Tanzanians, if you know that you really enjoyed, you were benefited from these loans, we have a form that will be completed. The forms, I have them, you have to fill in to complete so that when I go back home, then I will communicate with you, then to know, I'll come to you to show the loans amount that you really enjoyed and the balance that you are supposed to be paid, and the way of how the loans are being repaid. So Tanzanians, please, tusaidiane. Mr. Muta and other leaders of the Tanzanian community in the USA, please, assist them to create awareness to other Tanzanians who are living here, to make sure that they have them to communicate with the board. I will give you the number. We have, if you go and then you go into the website of the Higher Education Students Board, and you go to the loan repayment there, you will see on how you can communicate with the board, on how you can know the balance, on how to start servicing the loans. Please, Tanzanians, let's meet. Because this is a responsibility of you, and then start to pay their loans. Thank you.
Focus ya serikali ni kwenye mji wa Kigamboni, kwa sababu sasa hivi daraja linaunganisha Kigamboni na Dar es Salaam. Tuna mradi mkubwa sana kule Kigamboni, na hata mashirika mengine yamewekeza sana Kigamboni kwenye miradi ya nyumba, na tunategemea kwa muda mfupi sana Kigamboni itakuwa ni mji mpya pale Dar es Salaam. Kwa hiyo nyinyi mnavyoishi huku, mwangalie jinsi gani ambavyo mnawekeza kule nyumbani kwa fursa ambazo zipo. Tanzania imebadilika sana. sio kama wale ambao wameondoka miaka mingi, mnaweza mkirudi mkaona kwamba vile mko Texas au New York au sawa, kwa sababu ile daraja la sawa pale. Hebu tupigie makofi ya kibunge kidogo ndio sasa. Hiyo inatupa nguvu ili tuweze kuwekeza zaidi, na ndio maana tunakuja kuchukua mawazo huko ili tukiyapata tuende tukafanyie kazi. Lakini product ambayo nimekuja kuielezea specifically ni product ya Western. Wangapi mshawahi kusikia Western? Western, na ni wangapi ambao ni members wa Western? Naona mikono liva nyuma pale. Okay, sawa. Wako several. Western ni skimu ambayo tumeitengeneza maalum kabisa kwa ajili ya Tanzania wanaoishi nje ya nchi. Na product hii inakava vitu viwili vikubwa. Cha kwanza ni kwamba kama inatokea bahati mbaya unafariki. Kufariki ni Waislamu wanasema ni faraz, ni lazima mtu utakufa. The only problem is when. Lakini kufa ni lazima. Kwa hiyo hii product inakava kusafirisha mtu kumrudisha nyumbani na msindikizaji mmoja. Tunalipa return ticket ya msindikizaji mmoja kumrudisha nyumbani na kusafirisha mwili wa marehemu. Lakini wakati unasubiri hayo yatokee, una nafasi ya kuchagua dependents 4 kule nyumbani ambao tutawapatia matibabu bure. Na wale dependents sio lazima wawe biological related, kwa maana kwamba baba, mama, mtoto. Unaweza kuchagua mjomba, babu, shangazi, girlfriend, boyfriend, mtu yote ambao unaona kwamba anaweza akafiti kwenye ile insurance yako. Na hii insurance unachangia $300 kwa mwaka. $300 kwa mwaka inakuwezesha kupata hayo mambo mawili niliyokupatia. Ya kwamba unaweza ukasafirishwa na return ticket ya mtu mmoja kupeleka mwili kule nyumbani. Kwa US hapa mpaka sasa tumeshasafirisha watu 3. US tumesafirisha watu 3, na mwezi Disemba Canada tumesafirisha mtu mmoja, Japani mtu mmoja. Kwa hiyo unaweza kuona jinsi gani ambavyo hii system ambavyo inafanya kazi. Ni vizuri mnakuwa na hizi jumuiya. Nimeona hata michango ya ndugu yetu aliyefariki juzi imefika mpaka $100,000 na hivi. Na hii kama yule angekuwa kwenye mpango wetu wa Western, ile hela ingeenda kwa familia. Kwa sababu Western ingechukua ile responsibility ya kurudisha mwili nyumbani. Kuna Andrew, sijajua mmefikia wapi kwenye mchango, lakini kama angekuwa ni member wetu tungemsafirisha immediately kumrudisha nyumbani. Kwa hiyo tunawahimiza kwamba mjiunge na huu mpango. Si vizuri, ni vizuri kuchangishana, lakini kwa sababu hii skimu ipo, mngekuwa mnachangishana kwenye mambo mengine. Lakini sio swala la kusafirisha mwili nyumbani. Shirika lipo kwa ajili yenu. Lina take care kila kitu. Tangu anapokaa kwenye funeral home, kumpeleka airport mpaka kumrudisha Dar es Salaam. Tunaishia pale airport Dar es Salaam, au kama ni Kia tunaishia pale Kia, alafu ndugu wanachukua from there. Tunakava kila kitu, na return ticket ya mtu ambaye anafanyaje? Anasindikiza. Nimeshaongea mambo mengi sasa. Is it working? Sasa mimi sina haja tena kurudia huko. Hii Western ilianza rasmi, ilizinduliwa na Mheshimiwa Rais aliyepita Mrisho Jakaya Kikwete. Hapa kuna Dr. Tenende. Dr. Tenende ndio walidesign hii scheme. Mambo ya teknolojia hata. Hii ilikuwa wakati wa uzinduzi ulifanyikia hapa Marekani. Hao ni viongozi wetu walikuja hapa. Hizo data nilizokuwa nazitoa hapo za kusafirisha, lakini vile vile mtu anaweza akaamua kuzikiwa hapa Vile vile tuna cover hiyo tuna cover hiyo option kama utaamua kuzikiwa kwenye nchi yako uliopo, au unaweza ukamove tu kwa kwa button hivi haraka haraka. Naona hii au battery imeisha hiyo ya nenda slide nyingine. Okay, acha hapo, rudi hiyo ya nyuma. Tumeenda kizamani kidogo. Rudishie hiyo slide iliyopita. Kuna huduma zingine ukiachia hiyo ya Western ambazo tunazitoa na tunapanga kuzifanyia kazi zaidi. Kuna hiyo benefit transfer to Tanzania. Mnapokuwa hapa, kuna watu ambao wanaishi nje for a limited time, kwa maana kwamba nakaa miaka 5, 6 alafu narudi nyumbani. Lakini ukitaka kurudi nyumbani ulikuwa unachangia kwenye pension fund hapa. Uwezo ukachukua hela zako. Wanakupa option kama unataka withdraw, tupe mfuko kule nyumbani ambao hizi hela tunaweza kufanyaje? Kuzitransfer. Kwa hiyo watu wa UK wanatumia sana hiyo option kwa sababu hawaruhusiwi withdraw pesa zao. Wanapewa option kwamba kama unataka kuchukua, chagua mfuko kule nyumbani, hizi hela tutazitransfer. Najua hapa kwenu kuna discounting nadhani ukitaka kuchukua pension. I don't know if I'm right or wrong. Una discount ile, unapewa hela kidogo na nyingine lakini hii option ipo ya kutransfer kupeleka nyumbani. Kuna option nyingine ya kujiunga na ile traditional scheme ya kule nyumbani. Kwa maana kwamba unaweza ukachangia kila mwezi. Kila mwezi unachangia at least $50 ambayo inakuwa una uwezo sasa kupata pension mbili huku na kule nyumbani. Kwa hapa US tuna Abasi Biabusha anachangia kupitia mpango huu. Tuna watu wako Japani na Canada. Unakuta kwamba mtu amepanga kwamba mimi nitakaa miaka 10 kule nyumbani, anaweka hela yake kila mwezi. Akirudi unakuta anapata pension huku na kule. Au akirudi anaamua kuchukua zile hela zake. Hii nadhani ina confuse tu bwana. Mimi ngoja niendelee tu. Hii achana nayo. Kwa hiyo hizo option nirudishie kwenye ile slide iliyokuwa niko nayo mwanzo. Hizo option zipo kwa ajili yenu. Lakini kuna option nyingine ya kununua nyumba ambayo mwenzangu wa PSPF amesema. Kuna nyumba ambazo tunazijenga ambazo tunafanya mortgage. Mortgage nadhani huku nyinyi mnajua vizuri. Sisi tuko kwenye 15 years. Wenzetu wameenda 25 years, sisi tuko kwenye 15 years. Lakini vile vile hii ya miaka ni issue ambayo ni negotiable. Ni issue ambayo ni negotiable kwa maana kwamba kadri muda unavyokuwa mkubwa na interest inakuwa inakuwa kubwa. Tuna mradi unaitwa Dege Eco Village. Kuna nyumba ambazo sasa hivi zinakaribia kuuzwa za Kijichi huko Kigamboni. Na hizi nyumba tunaziuza kwa mortgage ya miaka 15. Kwa sababu ya muda nitawapatia tu hizi highlights ili tuweze kuonana baadaye. Hebu niachie hapo tena kidogo, manake unanichanganya kweli. Mipango ya mbeleni. Nikisema mipango ya mbeleni ni Kiswahili sahihi au kuna kitu tunakuja nacho kinaitwa family package. Kwa maana kwamba mtu anaweza kujiunga kama familia mkiwa huku, ikawa baba, mama, mke na watoto wanajiunga kama familia kupitia ule mpango wa Western. Kuna notion ambayo imekuja sehemu nyingi kwamba watu wanaandikisha wazee, wanasema hawa ndio wako vulnerable kwa kifo. Lakini na mifano kama 3. Watu waliandikisha kwa notion hiyo wanakufa vijana, watoto wanakufa, wazee wanabaki. Nilikuwa naongea hapo na ndugu yangu hata Chiume pale. Chiume alifariki ndugu yao, lakini wao wamemwandikisha nani? Mama. Japani nayo na kesi hivyo. Watoto wanasema huyu ndo anakaribia kufa. wanaondoka watoto. Sasa hebu niweke ile clip kidogo ile nani mara moja. Naona mwenyekiti amenitolea muda mdogo. Kuna National Diaspora Police tunashirikiana na Foreign Affairs, nitawapa details zake. Ni program nzuri kabisa kwa ajili ya tumeungana na Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Hiyo video unaweza kuionyesha kidogo? Labda hata kengele ya jeshi. Hebu nipelekee basi slide mbele kidogo. Nipelekee slide mbele. Hizo zilikuwa na teknolojia imetuharibia pause. Nilikuwa nataka muone kidogo mradi wa ndege Eco Village.
Tanzania, the land of endless possibilities, home to Mount Kilimanjaro, Serengeti National Park,